Hello, and welcome to another episode of Movies, They're Pretty Good. I'm your host, Travis Dudding, and today we are tackling another Stanley Kubrick movie. One of his most notorious, probably. Today we're talking about A Clockwork Orange, 1971. All right, let's get right into it. Okay, so we open on a shot of Alex DeLarge, played by Malcolm McDowell, and he's staring right into camera, and we see that he has makeup on his one eye, like kind of like an accentuated eyebrow or eyelash, not eyebrow, accentuated eyelashes painted on. This is on his right, on his right eye, left to us looking at him, but his right eye. And we slowly zoom out from him, and we see him sitting with some other people that are dressed similar to him. They're all wearing like white, all white with like, and then black bowler hats and top hats, that type of thing. They got like almost like workout gear on top, like over it, and then they got like a jock strap and everything like that. So just like a very distinct, unique, iconic outfits, easily, like, immediately recognizable. So we're slowly zooming out. We see that they're in this, like, kind of, it's very 60s British, like, I forget the name of the style, but it is, like, it's very Austin Powers reminiscent, British 60s. That's the vibe that it is. You got all these statues of nude women. They're like all like white except for the hair, and like is the only color. And and then that's all the hair. You got like purple wig and purple pubes on the statue, and they're like it's like the coffee tables are these statues, and then they also just have them like around the bar and everything like that. And then we hear Alex is narrating, and he's talking about that they're at the Korova milk bar, and that the milk is laced with different I'm guessing drugs. Like, he's just saying a bunch of like nonsense words because it's supposed to take place in like this totalitarian dystopian future England, and like the dialogue is very out there, but it's not hard to follow either. It's like they're saying just a bunch of words, but it's super easy to follow along for whatever reason, even though like I have the subtitles on. It's like I don't know what they mean, but I know what they mean. It's hard to explain, but if you've seen it, then you know what I'm talking about. So it's saying that they choose this specific and I forgot to write it down, but the milk that they are drinking, whatever it's laced with, it makes them like more ready for a bit of the old ultraviolence, as he says. So they're drinking that, and then it cuts to them walking around, and then they're like they're like in a tunnel, like under a road, I'm assuming, like maybe an overpass, that type of thing. And there's this drunk guy singing, like probably homeless, but they never state. And he's just laying there in the gutter singing. He's got liquor bottles around him, and then they walk up to him, and after he's done singing, they all applaud or whatever. Then he asks them for money, and Alex puts his cane onto his stomach and just starts pressing on him, and he's hurting him and everything. And we get this really cool close-up shot of Alex in profile, and we see that we can see his breath, so we know it's cold out there. And it's very threatening and intimidating and everything, and it's very scary. Like, it's very like I wouldn't want to mess with them. And I just really that shot really like stood out to me, and I was like, oh, I gotta write that down. And then of course they beat him up, of course, because that's kind of the whole thing with this movie. It's talking about this, like, in this future that violence is just completely out of hand and everyone's getting into it. It's all these little gangs and everything, and they're just beating people up all the time and everything like that. But more like, we'll keep getting into that. Cuts away from that into we can hear a woman screaming, and we see like a painting on the ceiling of this theater, and then it zooms down, and like we get from the narration that it's this other rival gang, Billy Boy, and they're assaulting this woman in the theater, and that's who we're hearing screaming. And they're taking her clothes off and everything. They're like sexually assaulting her, and it's not until Alex and his gang, who are waiting in the shadows at the back of the theater, make themselves known, and then they stop and they let her go, and she takes off running. And like it's like, okay, good, they didn't rape her, but also it's like, well, like that's still a super traumatic experience, you know. So it's like, you know, it's like a sigh of relief, but also like, shit, that's still like gonna mess her up, you know. That's just how this movie is, and I think that's the whole point of it, is just that it's just these terrible things happening. And this is in 1971, and it's like, I don't think it got quite as bad as they assumed, but they're not that far off, you know. It's still bad out there. And so then this fight breaks out between the two rival gangs, and they're like literally doing like every stunt you could possibly do in a choreographed fight scene. That's like jumping from the balcony and throwing into tables and throwing through windows and doing flips and getting thrown in the air and all kinds of stuff. And it looks very cool. It's a very fun scene, visually, like very visually stimulating. But then the fight's cut short because they hear the police coming, so they all run away and split up. And then we get this cool driving scene where it's them in this convertible, like futuristic convertible car. It's Alex is driving, and he's in the front, and you got one other guy sitting in the seat, but the other two are like sitting like up on the back of the car. You know what I mean? Because it's presumably like a 2-seater convertible, and they're just like sitting like on the back of the, like on the trunk basically, and they're just driving super fast down these country roads. But also, like, what I love about the shot is that it is like in front of like not a green screen, because this is prior to that technology, but it is like that type of thing. It's like a projected background of them driving, and they're just like sitting in the car, like pretending that it's moving. And it's like it's such a like cheesy when you think about it. It's so simple, but it's just that Kubrick touch, I'm pretty sure, that just makes it look incredible. It's like, this is the simplest, shittiest special effect, but it's like in the hands of Stanley Kubrick, it just looks amazing and iconic. And maybe it is just like their outfits and everything like that it's just like, wow, like that, it's just burned in my head, that image, always. And so they're driving like super chaotically. They're going like under the trailer of a truck that's like stuck in the road, and they just like duck down and drive under that, and because it's like a really low car and everything, and they're running people off the roads and just laughing. And then the name of the car is a Durango 95, and then that makes me wonder if like that has anything to do with like Dodge Durango, like when they came up with that name, like, oh, like a little bit of a reference into this future car from A Clockwork Orange. Probably not. I'm probably dumb. Anyways, so they come up to this house, and there's talking. He's talking in the narration like, oh, we're gonna do like the surprise visit is like what they're doing. So they're basically sneaking up into this rich house that they find on the road. It's just got like a lit up sign like by the road that just says home, which is interesting. gated thing, but they like just sneak up to it. They hop the fence and they're sneaking through the yard and going up to the house and knock on the door, and they're and it's we see on the inside, we see a guy sitting at a desk on a typewriter and he's typing. So writer, presumably. There's a whole bunch of books behind him and everything like that. And they hear the doorbell ring, and he's like, oh, like, who do you suppose that could be? Or who on earth do you think that could be? I don't have the exact quote. But then looks over at the wife, and she's in this like futuristic egg like couch thing, like a pod almost. And she's like, oh, I'll go check. She goes to the door, and she has it like the chain and everything, so it's just cracked. And Alex is there, and he's like, hey, there's been a terrible accident. Like, we need to use your phone. And she's like, oh, we don't have a telephone. Which that's like an obvious lie, but it's just like also a good thing to do, because you don't want just anybody coming in your house. And especially if it's like this, where everyone's just in these violent gangs and causing all this harm out there in the public. But then he's like persistent. He's like, please, like, my friend, he's like bleeding out here. And then she's saying no, like no, just go away. Like, I'm sorry, I can't let you in. We don't have a phone. But then the husband asks the writer, and he's like, hey, like, what's going on? And then they're like, oh, they say there's been an accident. And he's like, oh, like, well, so he has the heart, but he's not thinking all the way through. So he's like, oh, I guess we better let him in. And I'm saying that as someone who knows what's going to happen. So I have the like foresight to know like that something terrible is going to happen. But and maybe it is because of like all the movies like this that I am like so wary of. Well, it doesn't even need to be just movies. Like, you just got to read the news and know, like, you should be wary of anybody that you don't know personally, and you should be wary of the people that you know, because it's bad out there. I'm sorry, guys. Anyways, back to this back to this movie. All right. So let them in, and immediately, like, as soon as they like come in the door, then immediately they are like push the wife against the wall, and then she's screaming, and like she realizes that, oh, they have these masks on and they have weapons, so this is not good. But they grab her immediately, so it's like nothing she could do. Immediately pin the husband down and throw him on the ground, and like he's like sitting on his back with his knee in his back and everything, with his hands behind. He ties him up. I don't know what they use, but they gag him too, and then they gag her. One guy just had like the dim is the bigger of the droogs is what they're called, like that. And I used to think that was just like a term for his gang, but then I realized that he's just that all of the gangs, like that's like the name for like the minions or the workers, the grunts and stuff like that for these gangs and everything. And Alex is the leader, and then the followers are the droogs. So one of them, Dim, the bigger one, he's got the wife over his shoulder, and husband's pinned to the ground. They gag him, and then as this is happening, Alex starts singing in the rain, and it's just like, it's such a, all right. I just love the contrast. Well, it sounds weird to say, but I like the contrast of the horrible imagery with this delightful music. And it's, Kubrick's not the only one to do this. It does happen like in other movies, and I don't know if I'm not going to say like, oh, this is the first that happens, because that's how you like get called out and everything. It's like, no, like this has happened like 50 times. Like, Kubrick's not the first to do it. But I do enjoy when that happens, because I think the contrast makes it scarier, makes the scary thing scarier always. Take like, this isn't like top tier cinema. But take Insidious, how it's this scary movie, and then you have Tiny Tim's Tiptoe Through the Tulips, which is like just this cute little song, like delightful song with all these scary things happening. So now we have Singing in the Rain and this horrible, which ends up being a rape happening because they're cutting her clothes off, and we don't see anything like actually happen other than her clothes being removed and her being gagged and everything. And we see a little bit of the husband's face. We see Alex take his own pants off, and then just continues to sing the whole time. And then it cuts away, and they get away and everything, and they're back at the Korova Milk Bar. One of them, I forget, it's Pete and George, but I get them mixed up. I forget who is who. So it's Alex, Pete, George, and Dim. But one of them goes up to one of these statues that's not the, like, coffee table woman, but it's like a woman, like, on her knees with her hands behind her head, kind of like bending forward. And then he, like, walks up to the statue and, like, pulls a glass out, and then the milk is dispensed from the nipples of the statue. So very interesting, but it's like very on the nose too. It's like, oh duh, like if you're gonna have these like naked statues in a milk bar, then where else would it come from? So they're sitting at a table, and you know, in the narration he's saying like, oh, there's these upper class people from the TV station around the corner. They're also at the bar, and you can kind of hear their conversation and everything. He's eavesdropping, and during the like between songs where like the music kind of fades, and the lady in the group starts singing, and she's singing I forget what song it is, but it is like a operatic classical music, and Alex is a big fan of classical music. We'll come to find out, specifically Ludwig van Beethoven. And so he's like very interested in her singing, and she's like you know, just like casually singing, and when she's done, Dim does like a to her, and that pisses Alex off because he was enjoying the singing, and he takes his cane and whacks Dim right in the dick, and then he's like, oh, like, why'd you do that and everything. And then and he just like threatens him like, hey, well, first Dim threatens Alex, and he's like, what are you gonna do about it, basically, like puts him back in his place, like, no, like, I'm the leader, you're nothing, like, what do you think you could possibly do to me, that type of thing. So that just kind of messes up the whole dynamic of the group and everything, and everyone's like on edge now. So he goes home for the night. See him walking like through this like courtyard between like apartment complexes and everything, and there's just trash everywhere, and I think that's just like supposed to accentuate this like dystopian future that they're showing. Gets in the lobby of the apartment building, and there's trash everywhere in there. There's just like a random bra hanging from the stair rails and everything like that, and you're just hoping that whatever removal of that bra was consensual, but given how the rest of the movie's been so far, it's doubtful. And so he gets up to his room, he's getting ready for bed and everything. We see him put he takes a watch off, and then empties his pockets. He's got like a wallet and a watch and everything, just like stuff from the people he's been beating up all night, and puts it in this drawer, and it's full of watches and wallets and money and things like that, just all these stolen goods. Opens up another one of his drawers, and he's got a pet snake in there, so he's holding the snake and everything. And then he gets over to the he gets over to the stereo. He pulls out this tiny cassette of Ludwig van Beethoven, obviously. And but what's funny is like that's as far ahead into the future as they could see, was that like it's still cassettes, but they're just smaller. And like they did have like small cassettes, but they were like for answering machines and everything like that. That's how old I am. I remember like when the answering machine, now voicemail, had little tiny cassette tapes. Anyways, moving on from that. So he's puts on Beethoven, and then he's just kind of staring at the art on his wall. And then it's like, so he's got this wall, this picture of this woman like with her legs open, like a painting, not like a photograph. But then he has this like statue of 4 Jesuses, like they're all in the same pose, but almost like they're holding each other, like arm in arm, that type of thing. But they still have like the stigmata, like the nails in the hands and the feet and everything like that. They got the crown of thorns, but they're also completely naked too. And it's just like, it's weird. Don't know the purpose of it, other than it is just like, well, I kind of know because later on he kind of gets into it, but so I'll just more on that later. But yeah, he's just like staring at that, but then he has this like montage of visions of all these like violent things happening, like a woman being hung on the gallows and these explosions and just like blood coming out of someone's face because they're getting beat up, and then it's him as like a vampire and there's blood coming out of his mouth, and then it just like it shows his face, and then he's like talking about having these images while I think he says like slooshing, and I don't know if that means he's like masturbating, because you don't see like any movement that would indicate that, but he's also just like, he's a little too into whatever he's like picturing, and while he's staring at the wall. So anyways, goes to sleep. You see him wake up in the morning. His mom goes in to wake him up and says like, hey, like it's time for school. So then this is where we find out that he's like a teenager that's still in high school, and that's like crazy, especially with what's been going on so far. And he's like, oh no, I'm sick, like I'm just gonna sleep it off. And she's like, well, you haven't been to school all week. But you know, his mom, you could tell his mom is a little bit of a pushover than his dad too, when you later see him. So they parents go to work and everything. Then we see Alex get up and he's walking around the house in his little tidy whitey underwear. Then he walks past the parents' bedroom, and then there's a guy there, and he's like, oh, Mr. Deltoid, like what are you doing here? And then he's like, oh, like ran into your mom like on the way to work, and she said to come check on you and gave me the key to the house and everything like that. So he's just like, and it's weird because he's just like sitting there on the bed, and he's being like super creepy too, but I don't know if it's like that's just who he is, or if he does have like weird intentions. We kind of get that he is like a parole officer type. So Alex has been in trouble before, and he had to go to this I forget what the term was, but it's some kind of school for like troubled people. So so he's basically like, hey, like if you mess up again, then like there's nothing more, then you're just gonna go to jail, you know, like there's no go to a special school, it's just you're done after that. But it's weird because he's like sitting, so Alex is like sitting next to him on the bed, and he's like in his underwear with this like older man, this middle-aged man. Has like a weird vibe to him and everything. And then they're like laying down, like lays down next to him and everything like that. And then like threatens him by like punching Alex in the dick basically in his underwear. And it's so fucking weird, but I'm just like, all right, like whatever. It's maybe that. Yeah, I don't know. It's, you can either look way into it, or it is just like very simple on the nose, like, hey, this guy's a creep, and that's it, you know. So cuts away from that scene, and we see Alex like all dressed up. He's at the record store, just browsing around, and then he sees these 2 young girls, and they're looking at records, and so he like inserts himself into between them and starts browsing in that rack, and then starts talking to them and kind of flirting with them. And he's like, oh, like, what kind of record player do you have at home? I bet you have one of those cheap like picnic ones. Like, come to my house and like we can listen to it on like a real stereo. And then it cuts to them back at the house, but it's like it's sped up, like the entire scene's like in fast forward basically, and it's being played, the William Tell overture is being played, and it just shows them like they're listening to music, they're taking their clothes off, they're still walking around, and then they're having sex, and then they're listening to music again, and back to the bed, and back, you know, it's just super fast forward, and just everything that happens, and then that's it. That's the end of that scene. So then we see the Droogs are waiting in the lobby of the apartment. They're just like sitting around, and Alex comes downstairs like, hey, like, what are you guys doing here? And they're like, oh, like, you know, we didn't see you earlier today, so we thought maybe something was up, so we came to check on you, basically. But they have this, like, very full of themselves, sarcastic tone about them, and, like, they have, like, some kind of ulterior motive, basically. And, but Alex is picking up on this, and he just, like, Dim's like sitting in this low chair, and he like straddles him and then like sits on his lap and just like gets right in his face and starts like being all threatening and intimidating again. And the other guy that's standing up is saying like, oh, like, that's the thing, like, you got to be nice to Dim now, like, that's part of the new way. And Alex is like, what new way? And so basically they're like, hey, like, we'll be part of this group, but there has to be some changes and everything like that. And so Alex is kind of playing along like, okay, like, whatever you say. But then as they're walking away, we see a slow motion of them. They're walking down this sidewalk next to the water, and in the narration, Alex is saying that like, oh, like, I was calm on the outside, but I was angry on the inside, and all it took was to hear Beethoven playing from someone's window to really put me over the edge. So he hears the song and then just like grabs his cane and whacks one guy in the stomach, and then starts pushing him into the water. And then so that's the one guy, I think it's George, and Dim are in the water. And Pete's just like, shit, like, I'm out of here. He runs away. And then, like, Alex goes to, like, pull Dim out of the water, but then he has a knife behind his back and slices Dim's hand. And then, like, after this whole, like, slow motion ordeal, then it cuts to them at a restaurant, and everyone's all, like, sullen, except for Alex, of course, because he got his way. It's like, you put everyone back in their place, like, hey, maybe don't try to mutiny me anymore, and we won't have any problems. Like, now you're back to where you're supposed to be, like, below me, and that's it. So then they're talking about, like, oh, we know a place, like, we can hit, like, I have an idea. So let's go, like, there's this health club, and during this time of year, it's just this one lady there by herself with all her cats. So it's going to be very easy to, like, get in there and do whatever we want. So they get there. We see her, like, she's doing yoga. There's, like, 20 cats in the room with her. Then same thing with the doorbell. Well, it's not a doorbell. They're, like, hitting the, like, the letter flap in the door, so it's just like making a really loud noise and everything, and she's like, what the hell? And she goes down and checks on it. They're trying to do the same thing with the, hey, there's been an accident, my friend, he's bleeding on the road, like, please, we need a telephone. But she's not falling for it. She's like, no, like, you could try the pub a mile down the road. And Alex is like, oh, like, I understand, like, there's a lot of bad people out here, so I get it. Like, and then says like, oh, like he's gonna leave, but she's still like very suspicious of it. So as they're like going to the back of the house because they're gonna break in that way, she goes and phones the police and is like, hey, like something weird happened. There's these guys here, or this guy was here, and he was saying that there was an accident, but it stuck out to me because it was something about the words that he said, and I recognized them from the paper when I read about the writer and his wife. So she recognized the story because he used the same exact like scheme on her that he did with the writer and his wife. So she's like, oh, like I'm one step ahead basically. So the police are already notified, but as she hangs up, then she sees Alex on the door. So he's already gotten in, and so he's waiting by the door, and she's like, who the hell are you? How'd you get in here? And they kind of have a little standoff vocally for a little bit. And but then she picks up a statue and goes to attack him. And because she's like, oh, like, you know, you're not going to take me. I'm going to like fight you off basically. And he picks up this like rocking penis sculpture that's on the desk, and he's also been like messing with it, like trying to intimidate her, like, and she's like, don't touch that, like, because it's an expensive art piece. And so he kept messing with it, and he picks that up. That's like his weapon, and they're like kind of she's like trying to hit him, but she's like, I don't know, I feel like if she just like let go of the statue and threw it at his head, that it would have helped. But she does end up like hitting him with it, and he's knocked to the ground, but it's not enough. So he's able to get up and get his like sculpture, and then he, like, I'm guessing smashes her in the face with it, because they don't like show it hit, but based on like the camera, because the camera's kind of like going in at her face, like as he's like 1, 2, 3, like basically, and just whacks her in the face. But then he hears the sirens, and he's like, oh shit, I gotta get out of here. So he gets downstairs, and as soon as he gets outside to his droogs that are waiting for him at the front door, they smash him over the head with a glass milk bottle. And he's bleeding. He's like, oh, Jesus, I can't see, I'm blind. Like, and they run off. So, and leave him to get caught by the cops, which he does. So he gets arrested. We see him at the police station. He's in the interrogation room. They're trying to get some information out of him. He's not giving anything up, and he's trying to say like, hey, it's my droog's fault. Like, they talked me into it. I didn't want to do it. You know, usual bullshit. And then Mr. Deltoid shows up, the weird guy from the bed and everything, and he's there, and he's just like laughing at him. He's like, oh, like I tried to warn you, you're stupid, you're caught now, there's nothing you can do, and now you've graduated to murderer. And he's like, what are you talking about? I didn't kill anybody. And he's like, yeah, that lady that, like, I just came from the hospital, she just died. And so now they got him for murder. So apparently, like, it's easy to get away with just beating people up and raping people, but murder is like, nope, that's the no-no. So I feel like a lot of people get away with the other things. And I don't know, some people get away with murder here too. So not, you know, for being from 1971, still very prominent. Relevant. Prominent. I don't know what I'm talking about. So we see him. He gets sentenced to 14 years in prison. See a scene of him getting processed in. Then it cuts to him in church, and one of the other prisoners is making like kissy faces at him, and that's pissing off the guard. But you know, there's nothing the guard's like doing about it. Then we see him like in the library, and he's reading the Bible because he's like trying to act like he's going to be reformed, and he's going to be a good person after this and everything. So he's like very just playing the part basically to like fool everybody. and we see him. He's reading the Bible, and then he's having these dream or fantasies about, because he's talking about like, oh, like I love ultraviolence and everything like that. Then there's a lot of it in this book, the Bible, and he's like picturing himself as one of the Roman soldiers at Jesus's crucifixion, because then he could be like torturing and everything like that. And then we see him like fantasizing as being like in a battle from the Old Testament, because he says it's like, oh, like the later stuff in the Bible is like too preachy. I like the old stuff with the wars and the multiple wives and all that stuff. So we just see him picturing himself in various places like that, or scenarios like that. So then the priest comes and talks to him, and he's like, hey, like and then he's just like playing his part, like, oh, like would you say that I've been like good since I've been here? And he's just kind of like buttering up the priest and everything like that. And then he is talking to the priest, and he's like, hey, like have you heard of that? I've been hearing about this new treatment coming along, and I was wondering if you could put in a good word for me. And the priest is like, it's like, how did you hear about the Ludovico treatment? And he's like, oh, like, overhear people talking. I've seen the news clippings and stuff like that. And he's like, well, it's a highly experimental treatment, and it's not come to this prison yet, and I don't know if it will. So then we see a inspection from like I thought it was the warden, but it turns out that it's the Minister of the Interior of Great Britain, and he's there to find basically a candidate for this treatment at this prison. And we see him going into the cells. He's in Alex's cell. He's like looking at everything. You got like pictures of naked women on the wall, like you would see in like most like prison cells probably. But then he notices the Beethoven bust and like a picture of Beethoven, and he's like intrigued by that. He's like, oh, like a little impressed and everything too. And then we go out to the prisoners. They're all lined up and everything, and he's looking at them like one at a time, and he's kind of talking about this treatment, and Alex butts in and says like agrees with them. So he's basically trying to butter up the minister now, and it works because the guard's like yelling at him like shut up, you're not supposed to be talking. And then the minister's like, oh no, like what's your name, and like starts talking to him and everything. And then right then and there decides that Alex is going to be the one that goes through this experimental treatment. And the other people are like, well, don't you want to see the other cell blocks or the other prisons? And he's like, nope, he's the one. Like, that's it. Oh, and another thing we get, that's kind of like a tossed away line, is that the minister's talking about like, oh, like these petty criminals are like taking up so much room in these prisons that but we're going to need the room for political prisoners. So now like we're getting our first taste of how like shady the government is being, and you don't like get a lot of like head-on information about it. It's just these throwaway lines here and there. Basically a little bit more towards the end you find out some concrete stuff, but it is just like little snippets like this that you might not even notice if you're not watching it for the 5th, 6th time. So he's being transferred to the Ludovico Medical Facility, where he will undergo his treatment. We see him like in the prisoner transfer process. He's got his regular clothes back on. He gets uncuffed and put into the custody of the officer that's there. Gets taken to his room, and he's sitting there in bed. He's reading a magazine. He's eating food, like regular food again. And then here comes a doctor with a nurse, and starts asking him questions like, hey, like I'm the assistant to the main doctor, and so I just have to like ask you some questions and give you some medications. And so he gets injected with a bottle or with experimental serum number 114, because it zooms in on the bottle. So then they don't go into detail because he's trying to ask some questions like, hey, what's in there? And he's like, is it going to make me sleep? And she's like, no, nothing like that. And she says it's for malnourishment. So that's why he needs to take it with his food. But, it's suspicious. And so he gets injected with that. And so he's like, oh, and she's saying, like, so we'll start the treatment soon. And he's asking, like, how it's going to be. And he's like, oh, and she says that we're going to show you a series of films. And he's like, oh, like, go into the pictures. Like, that'll be nice and everything. But then we see him, so he's in a theater, but he's, like, strapped into a chair. And so this is the next scene, by the way. He's strapped in, like, in a straitjacket, and then strapped into this, like, almost like a dental chair because he's like leaned back a little bit, and then they put these lid locks on his eyelids to keep his eyes open, and there's like a helmet with these like sensors on his like trying to like read his brain activity, I'm sure, like neural sensors. And there's a guy next to him that's like putting in eye drops because his eyes are being left open and they want him to be able to see what's gonna happen. So then the film, in quotes, starts, and he's like, and the narration, he's saying like, oh, if it started out great at first, like, and it's just this video of and he said it's like, he's commenting on the quality. It's like, oh, it's like something you would see like made in Hollywood. Like that's how like quality the video was, I guess. And it's this man getting beaten up, and they're dressed, and it's the same thing. They're like dressed similarly as his like droogs, just the hats are different. Like one's wearing like a pirate hat pretty much. And it's just this man getting beaten up by this like gang of people, and it's like zooming in on his face, and the blood's coming out and everything like that. But like Alex is just enjoying it at this point. And he says like, okay, then it was on to the next film, and it's this woman being raped by this gang of men, and he's saying like, oh, like that's it's like saying that it was fine at first, but once it got to like the 6th or 7th guy, then he started to feel sick, and then you could see his expression changing, like, oh, okay, like what's going on, like this is something I like, and it's like making me feel bad, like what's happening. And he starts to freak out a little bit. So then but then it cuts to the doctor who's in the back of the room, and he's saying like that he's gonna start to experience a death-like paralysis and thoughts of like impending fear and helplessness and all this stuff, like basically like describing like sleep paralysis almost. That's what he's going to be going through, because he's just like sitting there being exposed to all this like terrible footage, and he can't like look away from it, he can't close his eyes or anything like that, so he just has to like absorb it, basically. He has no choice but to. So then we see him talking to the assistant doctor again, and she's like asking him how he's feeling. He's like, feeling a little sick. Like, I don't understand like why I felt sick like that. And she's like, it means that you're getting better, but you're not there yet. Like it's the normal thing would be to feel sick and horrified by seeing those things. Like, it wasn't normal if you were to enjoy it. So like the fact that you felt sick means that like you're on the right track. And she said like, oh, you're gonna have 2 sessions tomorrow. And he's like, oh, like worried about that. Is like, oh my god, like 1 was bad enough, like I can't imagine 2. So second day, first film we see is just footage of Hitler, the Nazis, World War II stuff, just like all the horrors of war, all these bad things happening. They don't show it in the movie, but we hear Alex talk about it later that there was like concentration camp footage. So just showing all this, again, just horrible stuff, just a different. And then but then Alex is realizing that the music that they're playing is Beethoven, and specifically Beethoven's Ninth. And this is what puts him over the edge, and he starts screaming. He's like, no, like, you can't do this. It's a sin. Like, why would you put Beethoven over all this, like, horrible stuff? And the doctor's like, hey, like, that, you know, that it is what it is. Like, it can't be helped. You know, and then he's like talking to the other doctor. He's like, you know, this, like, now it's like still a punishment and everything. So it like works out, and it sucks that he like kind of just basically like, sucks for him. Like, now he's gonna hate Beethoven. He's gonna have the same like reaction to Beethoven as he is to these violent things. But yeah, Alex is still freaking out about it and everything. So now it cuts to the demonstration, like, of him being cured and everything. And in the narration, he's talking about that it's been 2 years since he went into prison, because they didn't really explain that how long he had been in there before he went into treatment. This is the first mention of it, so it has been 2 years. And so we see like a group of people. We see the people from the prison. We see the minister, the doctors, everybody. Is there to see like if the treatment worked. Basically, is he cured? Is he reformed? And it starts out with it's Alex on stage, and then some random guy comes out and slaps him in the face, and then just starts beating him up basically, and he's like yelling at him, and he's like, "What are you gonna do about it? What are you gonna do about it?" And he like kind of like steps on his face, and he makes him lick the bottom of his shoe and everything like that. And like Alex can't do anything about it, because like the thought of doing anything violent is just makes him sick to his stomach now. So after a while, then they call him off. It's like, okay, like that's enough, and the guy like bows like it was a play and everything, and goes off stage. And then comes out this woman, not fully nude, she's topless, but she has like a white underwear, and then she has like a silver wig on and everything, and she's lit very like sparkly, and like almost like it's a dream sequence type thing. And then Alex is like looks up at her, and he's like oh no, like he's having like the feelings that he used to have about women and everything like that. So he's having those compulsions and everything. And she just walks up to him, and she's like standing over him while he's like knelt on the ground, because he's still on the ground from when he got beat up basically, but he's not up on his knees now. And he goes to like grab her, but he can't. Like as soon as his hands get up like to grab her breast, then he starts to feel like overcome with the sickness again, and he just can't do it, and he just starts like belching, and like his hands like kind of like clench up, and he falls down to the ground. And then they're like, okay, that's enough, and she does her bow and everything like it was a play, and goes off stage. And then they're like, okay, like that's it, like he's reformed and everything, and everyone's applauding. And so he gets released, and he's back out into the real world. We see him go home, and he's at his house. He walks in and everything. He walks to his room, but then it's different. There's like a bunch of different stuff on the walls. The bed's different. He's like, okay, what's going on? And he goes to the living room. So it's weird that he like walked into the house and no one's like, who's here, got up to look, but his parents and some other guy that we haven't seen are sitting in the living room, and they're all like, oh my god, like Alex, like what are you doing here? Because they had like no idea that he was coming home. And they're like, oh, we just read about it in the newspaper, because they see the article saying that like he was reformed and everything like that, and that he got released from prison. And he's like, you could tell that they're like visibly nervous about him being there, like, because I mean, I would be too. Like, you find out your son murdered somebody and then he's just like randomly home only 2 years later. It's like, okay, what are you doing here? And they're like, and he could see that they're nervous and everything, and it's like, not to worry, I'm completely reformed, and he's all proud and everything. But then he's like, I can't help but notice there's another person in the room, and they're like, oh, that's Joe. He's a lodger. He's renting your room basically, and he's been here for a couple years now. But then Joe's like, hey, like, I know who you are. I know what you've done, and just kind of like making him feel bad about it, like, as he should. He was a bad person. He still is probably, and so he's like getting all in Alex's face, and Alex goes to punch him, but he can't. Like, as soon as he gets his fist up, then he starts getting sick and belching again, and they're like, oh, like, what are we gonna do? And then the mom's like getting upset, she's crying, and Joe's like, look what you've done to your family, and like, you're gonna come here and hurt them again. And so basically, just making him feel bad. And then he's like, okay, like, well, if I don't get to stay here, where's all my stuff? And his dad tells him, like, well, we had to sell it, and it's like the government came and took it and like sold it as like a form of compensation for the victims' families. And it was like, okay, like, well, what about my snake? And he's like, well, it was like an accident and the snake died. So now he has like nothing. He can't stay there because they're not going to kick Joe out, and so he can't live at home, and so he's just on his own now. And he doesn't have any of his stuff. He doesn't have his snake, so he's just back out on the streets. So he walks out there. He's walking around. He's got his possessions that he got back after being in prison and everything, and walking down, he's just like kind of looking into the water, like by a bridge and everything, and kind of spacing out and contemplating and everything. And a homeless man comes up and asks him for money, and we realize that it's the same one that he beat up at the beginning of the movie. And so he gives him some money, and the man says thanks, but then he notices his face, and he's like, hey, like, I don't forget a face. You're the one that like almost killed me back then. And then he like starts grabbing him and stuff and takes him over to the tunnel, and there's a whole bunch of homeless people there, and they just all gang up on him and just like beat him up. They take his clothes, the ones that he was holding in the bag, and everything like that. And then they all start to scatter because some police show up. But he looks up at the police officers, and it's Dim and one of the other ones. I don't remember if it's Pete or George, but it's two of his old droogs, and they're cops now. And they're like, oh, like, we grew up, so we got grown-up jobs, but they're like still the same people, so they beat him up a little bit, and then they throw him in a car. They drive him out to the middle of the woods, take him out. And there's this like metal bathtub full of water, dirty water, and they dunk his head in there. Dim's holding him in the water while the other guy's like hitting him with the nightstick and just beating him while he's like drowning basically. And then eventually, like, when he's like moving less, then they take him out and everything and just leave him there in the middle of the woods, like half drowned, like almost dead and everything, and then they just leave. So then he's like wandering around, and it starts raining and everything, and we hear in the narration, it's like, I was so out of it from everything that I didn't realize what house I had arrived at, and it's the house where the writer and the wife were, where they snuck in before and attacked them. So he ends up at that house. He's ringing the doorbell, and it's I like the parallel of the writer is at the typewriter again, and he says the exact same thing that he said to his wife. It was like, who do you suppose that could be, like, at this hour? But it pans over, and his wife's not there. It's this buff guy working out. He's benching something, and he's like, oh, I'll go check. And he walks away, and he's like wearing like this like workout speedo thing. It's actually David Prowse, the man who was in the Darth Vader costume, not the voice of Darth Vader. That's James Earl Jones. I'm sure you guys know that, but yeah. So it's Darth Vader. He goes to answer the door, and he's like, "Hey, like, I got beat up by the police and everything," and so he brings him in, and we see that the rider is in a wheelchair now. So he kind of wheels over. He's like, "Oh, what's going on?" And he's like slowly starting to recognize him, but he's only recognizing him as the guy from the newspaper, because there's the newspaper articles saying like, "Hey, this guy got this experimental treatment and he used to be a criminal and now he's reformed." So he's like, "Oh my God, it's that guy. Like, okay, like come in, like we'll get you cleaned up." And he's saying like, "Hey, like the police brought me out here to beat me up." And the writer, he's like this activist, basically, like subversive writer, saying like, "Okay, like the government's corrupt. I knew it. Like we gonna take care of you. I have some political friends that I want you to meet," and stuff like that. So he's like seeing this as this opportunity, like, "Hey, I'm gonna take down the corrupt government because right in here I have a witness to how corrupt they are, because they like did this experimental procedure on me and tortured me, and now I get out and then the police just attack me and I'm a victim and everything like that." So that's how he's seeing it. And then so like, okay, like he tells David Prowse, I think Julian is his name, like, "Hey Julian, like go run a bath for him and get him all cleaned up, and then you can eat and everything." So Alex is in the bath and he's sitting there and he starts humming "Singing in the Rain." And I think to him, like, everything was so normal, like when the attack and the rape and everything happened, that he's not putting that together like, "Hey, I was singing this song and everything," because to him it's just like whatever, that's not going to stick out to him. So all he's thinking is like, "Hey, I was in the rain, I have Singing in the Rain stuck in my head," and he starts singing it. Meanwhile, Frank, the writer in the wheelchair, he's on the phone with his political friends and he's like, "Oh, this is like the perfect opportunity. Yeah, he's here. I'll keep him here," and everything like that. So he is seeming like sinister, even though he hasn't put the pieces together yet. But as soon as he gets off the phone and he can hear what Alex is singing, that's where it clicks in his head. And we see like this shot from like below as he's like got his like head towards the door, and he's like almost like seizing, but like it's hard to explain it. Like I could show you, but I can't, like on the podcast. But it's very reminiscent of in The Shining when Danny and man, what's his name? The Scatman Carruthers character. I forgot his name. But when they're like connecting and like realizing like what's going on with the ghost and everything, it reminds me of that. So another like thing that Kubrick like brought back later on, which I really like when directors do that. So yeah, he's that at this point he's put it together that this is the same man that came into my home, attacked me and my wife, and I got him basically. So Alex gets out of the bath, he comes down and comes and sits at the table. There's like a place setting for him with a plate of spaghetti and a glass of wine and a bottle, and he sits down and just helps himself to the food and everything. And then Julian comes in carrying Frank, and Frank's in the wheelchair, and this is just like showing how strong Julian is, that he's just like carrying the full wheelchair and everything, and brings him down the stairs and sets him at the table next to Alex. But you could tell that the tone has completely changed at this point. Like it's a lot more like threatening and menacing on the part of Frank, and Julian's just very like intimidating, sitting there with his arms crossed, and he's got some huge arms because he's bodybuilder, like a professional bodybuilder, David Prowse. So is like offering him a bunch of wine. It's like, no, please, like, drink the wine. And Alex is starting to feel suspicious because, you know, you don't have to be a complete, like, the world's greatest empath to realize, like, that there's some tension in there. And so he's like a little suspicious. He's like, oh, aren't you guys gonna have some wine? And they're like, no, like, none for me. Like, but he still does end up drinking it. And the doorbell rings, and the friends are there. And it's like, oh, like, I'd like you to meet some friends of mine and politics. And so they come to the table. They're like, oh, nice to meet you. We've heard a lot about you. And so they sit down, and the woman pulls out a notebook, and she's like going to ask him some questions, and just starts saying, like, hey, like, what was the treatment about? Like, what happened? And he's saying, like, oh, like, I was inadvertently conditioned against Beethoven. I was a big Beethoven fan, but now I can't hear it. And just like, oh, all music? And he's like, no, just Beethoven, and just specifically the Ninth Symphony. So they keep asking him questions, and eventually he just passes out and collapses into the falls face first into the plate of spaghetti. And they're like, okay, like, he's out. Good. That's good. So this was the plan all along. Obviously, he got poisoned and everything. So he wakes up in a small bedroom, but he wakes up sick, and he's like, oh, I was sick. And then I realized why. It's because they're blasting Beethoven's Ninth and into the room. And he, like, is trying to cover his ears, and he can't. It's too loud. And then it cuts to, then he tries to leave the room, but the door's locked. And so he's like trying to, like, let me out, turn it off. And then it cuts to Frank downstairs. He's sitting in front of I think it was a reel-to-reel player with the stereo and everything. And he's sitting at the table, and he's looking up at the ceiling and smiling. And then it's slow zoom out, and we see the female friend standing to the left of him, and Julian to the right. And they're, like, kind of standing very, like, posed against the wall, like, very contemplative poses and everything. And it zooms out, and then we see that they're at, like, a pool table with the speakers facing up towards the ceiling. And then we see the male friend, and he's at the front of the pool table, just, like, throwing rolling balls across. And it's so, like, picturesque. That's not the word I want. But just the framing is so perfect. It's just one of those shots in that Kubrick does so well that it's like you could take any frame from that scene and it looks like a Renaissance painting, like that quality. I'm not saying the exact style, but that level of artistry that goes into that shot. I just loved it, and it was amazing. But then cut back to Alex, and he's like, just, he can't take it anymore, and jumps out of the window and hits the stone walkway on the ground, and then cut away again. And then we see him in the hospital, and he's all, like, bandaged up, and he's got all these, like, screws, like, to hold him in place and everything so he doesn't move his leg. And presumably he's been in a coma for a little bit, and he's waking up, and the nurse and the doctor are behind a curtain, and they're having sex with each other. And then they're like, oh my god, he's awake. And then they, like, come out and, like, putting their clothes back on. So he wakes up. We see him talking to a psychiatrist, and she's first we see a montage of, like, articles saying that, like, hey, the guy that got the experimental treatment, that all this other bad stuff happened to him, and he tried to kill himself, and this and this and this. So it's like it's making the government look bad. So, like, the these political people used him to get in their word against the minister and everything, and saying like, oh, this inhumane treatment and everything. And then we see that his parents come to visit him, and he's like saying like, oh, you're not welcome here. But then they're like apologizing, like, hey, like we shouldn't have kicked you out and everything. That's your home, and we're sorry, and we realize that we played a part in all of this, and we love you, and we're sorry, basically. So then he's talking to the psychiatrist, and she's like, oh, I'm going to show you some slides, and I just want you to fill in the blanks. And they're basically like a bunch of like cartoons, and there's like one quote bubble, and then he has to fill in what they would say. And it seems like from this that he is a kind of back to his old self, but because he's like filling in the blanks with some of his like chaotic, violent tendencies, but he's not acting on them. So maybe that's the whole point of the treatment, is that like he's not really changed, but he just literally can't act on his compulsions. And that's also what the priests had to say against the treatment, was that like, no, like he can't really be a good person if he doesn't have free will anymore, basically. So it's like, you're not changing him, you're just taking away his free will and taking away his humanity, basically. And it's like, oh, like they said I had a special visitor coming, and then we see the special visitor, and it's the minister, and he's coming to like check on him and everything. But he's also just like, and as he's like talking to him, he's feeding him and everything, and saying like, hey, like basically, like we'll set you up for life, but you just got to help us out with this election coming up, and you got to like go out there and show the public that you're a reformed person, and you know, and basically like, you scratch our back, we'll scratch yours, basically. And so he agrees to it, and then the press comes in, and they're like all these cameras flashing, and they're doing the like typical handshake picture and everything, and they wheel in some speakers to play some music and everything, and they start playing Ode to Joy. And then it kind of zooms in on his face, his expression changes, and then we see him fantasizing again. He's having this vision of him having sex with a woman, but they're in the snow, and they're being surrounded by all these like Dickensian like townspeople, like the straight out of A Christmas Carol, basically, just like watching and clapping and everything. And then in the narration, we get at the last line, he's like, oh, was I cured? And then credits, and it hits the credits, and then we get the Gene Kelly version of Singing in the Rain from Singing in the Rain that plays over the whole credits until the very end. So that's it. That is A Clockwork Orange. So very, very interesting movie. I think the first time I watched it was when I had a broken leg in my freshman year of high school, and a family friend had brought over like this big tub full of VHS tapes, like all his whole movie collection, basically, in this big Rubbermaid tub. And so I would just I couldn't do anything except sit and watch movies, so I just watched through a bunch of them, and this was one of them, and just definitely blew my mind at that age. And then as I got older and watched it again, it was just like, I keep coming back to it just because it's so, I always notice something new. I know I say that every time, but it's true. Like, that's why it's great to watch movies a second time, even ones that you think that you didn't like the first time. Sometimes that second try is what really sells it. On initial release, it got had an X rating, and I think I don't think anything was edited out as far as I know. I think just over time it's like, okay, that's just a regular rated R now. There's a few movies like that. But yeah, very controversial. It was banned in Spain for a moment. Like, that was when they had like a dictator, though. There's a documentary on that on HBO Max, but I have not seen that yet. Nominated for Best Picture, Best Director for Stanley Kubrick, Best Writing, Best Adapted Screenplay, basically, and Best Film Editing, but it did not win any of those Oscars. But yeah, incredible movie. Just like very disturbing. It's definitely not for the faint of heart. And very, I don't know. It always has me thinking. And it's just crazy to see how relevant it still is, but also just, it still holds up. It still holds up. And I can't wait to watch it again. I always enjoy it. Always pick up something new. I'm sorry I'm getting so repetitive, but that's just like, it's one of those movies that when it ends, I'm just like, man, that was good. But then my brain goes to mush, and I'm surprised I even got through recording this, because I just I just can't think except for like, that was good. And then I'm just picturing the scenes that stick out and everything like that. So thank you for sticking through this. Thank you for listening. I hope you all continue to listen. Please get in there on the Instagram. Any questions, just DM me and stuff like that. Suggestions, stuff like that. I'm going to try to be more active with like polls and things like that, other than just the posts about like the upcoming episodes and when they're out and everything like that. But yeah, the Instagram is at movies. They're pretty good with no punctuation or anything like that. But yes, please follow. That's the social media where I'm the most active, but I also have a Facebook, Twitter, and a YouTube channel where you might be listening to it on there anyway. So yeah, thanks again. I hope you guys stick around for next week, and I hope everyone is having a great week. Also, stay tuned. Later this week, I'm going to do some bonus episodes throughout the Oscar season. The first one being just going through all the nominees and talking about which ones I've seen and which ones I recommend, and just my thoughts going forward. And then I'll kind of update that throughout the season, and then do one final one after the Oscar ceremony. So yeah, stay tuned for that. And just everyone have a great week. Thanks.